I stepped into the strategy room and stopped. My chair had been shifted aside, angled toward the wall. The center seat was occupied by Evan Whitaker, recently promoted head of innovation. Jacket pressed, expression rehearsed. He didn't look surprised to see me standing. Douglas Whitaker, our CEO, looked up and spoke before I could say anything. "Casey, you don't need to run this anymore. Evan will take it from here." The sentence landed cleanly. No apology, no explanation, just replacement. Delivered out loud. There had been no warning, no updated agenda, no conversation beforehand. One moment I was walking into a meeting I had led for over a decade. The next, I was an observer in the room I built. Before we continue, I'd like to make a note. This story includes fictionalized details and is intended to highlight real workplace lessons. If it's not for you, I understand, but if it resonates, stay with me until the end. For 12 years, I designed the systems that turned a fragile startup into a company valued at $5.7 billion. I built the operational backbone, the controls that survived audits, regulators, and lawsuits. Evan inherited a title. I inherited a seat by the wall. That was when it became unmistakable. This wasn't symbolic. Authority had already moved, not announced, not debated. Reassigned in real time, with witnesses. I sat down in the displaced chair and stayed quiet, realizing the decision had already been made before I entered the room. This meeting wasn't about strategy. It was about showing me clearly and publicly who had replaced me. Wait a minute, I need to say something. A quiet survey once showed that nearly 90% of people worldwide have been treated unfairly. Most just never talk about it. If you want them to know they're not alone, consider subscribing. Evan started the presentation with a confidence that felt unearned. Slides moved quickly, filled with arrows and bold phrases. But the logic underneath was wrong from the first assumption. He described dependencies that didn't exist, timelines that ignored safeguards I had built, and trade-offs that would have broken the system within weeks. I corrected him once, carefully, choosing precision over tone. The room went still for half a second. Douglas Whitaker didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. "Let him finish," he said. "The board needs confidence." The words landed heavier than the mistake itself, as Evan continued. I felt something familiar tighten in my chest. I remembered year 2, when cash was almost gone, and a single regulatory failure would have ended us. I had slept under my desk that week, rewriting core processes so we could pass an emergency audit no one else believed we'd survive. I remembered designing the control layer that later shielded us from litigation, the one investors now bragged about without knowing my name. Evan spoke about acceleration, about simplifying architecture, about removing what he called unnecessary constraints. Every sentence erased a decision I had made to keep this company alive. I watched board members nod, not because it was right, but because it sounded forward. During a pause, Douglas leaned toward me and lowered his voice. "You're too close to the details now," he said, almost kindly. "This company needs altitude, not depth." I left the building without anyone stopping me. No exit interview, no meeting invite. Just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had changed. Even though nothing official had been said, Douglas didn't send paperwork. He didn't need to. The title came verbally, almost casually, strategic contributor. It sounded harmless, even flattering, the kind of phrase designed to avoid resistance. But when I logged into the system that evening, approval paths were gone. My name no longer sat at the top of decision trees. Authority had been removed without ceremony. There was no termination, no severance, no signature required. I hadn't been fired. I had been bypassed. In corporate language, that distinction mattered. In practice, it meant I could build nothing, approve nothing, and stop nothing. That night, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Early contracts, drafts written before lawyers polished the edges, back when trust replaced leverage. I read slowly, not searching for revenge, just clarity. That's when I found it. The intellectual property clause wasn't vague. It was precise. Every core system, every foundational architecture I had created was licensed to the company, not owned by it. The license was exclusive, conditional, and revocable. The trigger wasn't termination, it was loss of decision-making authority. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time. My role didn't need to disappear on paper. It only needed to be diminished in function. That threshold had already been crossed, for the first time since the meeting. My anger cooled into focus. This wasn't an emotional slight. It was a structural mistake. They believed silence meant compliance. They believed avoiding a firing avoided consequences. They were wrong. I closed the document and shut down my laptop. Understanding something they didn't yet realize. I no longer needed permission to act. The rules they ignored had already shifted the balance back to me. I sat quietly, not planning retaliation, but preparing alignment, leverage, and timing. Because experience had taught me that real power never announces itself. It waits patiently, lets others miscalculate, then moves decisively when silence becomes permission to correct outcomes. If you're curious what I'm going to do, leave a comment with the number 1. I didn't respond the way they expected. I didn't argue, didn't escalate, didn't defend myself in meetings that no longer invited my input. Silence became my position, not out of weakness, but restraint. The pressure didn't vanish, it accumulated. Evan began leading immediately. A rushed rollout went live without proper dependency checks, breaking downstream integrations that had taken years to stabilize. Within hours, alerts stacked up. A major client flagged performance anomalies. Another requested an emergency call. Evan called it turbulence. I recognized structural failure. People started coming to my desk quietly. "Did you see this? Is this supposed to behave like that?" I answered only when asked directly, never volunteering opinions. Douglas noticed. "You're being awfully quiet," he said one afternoon. Half joke, half warning. I smiled and nodded. At night, I worked alone. I mapped dependencies the way an engineer maps fault lines. Every system, every control, every module that traced back to code I had written or architected. I wasn't looking for a button to push. I was calculating exposure, percentages, intersections, points of no return. The numbers surprised even me. Core services, compliance layers, security gates, operational logic, more than half of what kept the company functional tied back to structures I controlled. Not personally owned on paper, but licensed, conditional, fragile if mishandled. The board started asking harder questions. Evan started deflecting. Legacy complexity. He said, inherited constraints. The words sounded familiar. They were mine once, used carefully, in his mouth. They were excuses. Then Douglas called me into his office. "No witnesses, no smiles. We need to clean this up." He said, "Hand over full core access. Evan can't operate with you holding keys." His tone assumed agreement. I didn't answer immediately. I understood the request for what it was. This wasn't collaboration. It was extraction. I nodded slowly, buying time, feeling the pressure finally surface. Silence had unsettled them enough to reach for authority they didn't fully understand. I stayed outwardly cooperative, inwardly measuring consequences. Each misstep tightened the space around them. Each unanswered alert increased dependency on systems they couldn't replace quickly. I wasn't stalling. I was letting gravity work. Watching leadership feel weight without understanding the source. Knowing the moment they demanded more would reveal everything in time and under pressure alone. I knew the request would come sooner rather than later. Pressure always follows silence. And Evan had reached the limit of pretending control without actually possessing it. He asked in the open, not privately. With Douglas beside him, "I need full system access," Evan said, palms flat on the table. "I can't lead if I'm locked out." The room watched me, waiting for compliance. I didn't raise my voice. "Access isn't the issue," I said. "Authority is." The sentence landed heavier than I expected. Evan blinked. Douglas frowned. Douglas leaned forward. "You're being obstructive," he said sharply. "This company can't function if you keep holding things hostage." He used the word deliberately. as if naming it made it true. I met his eyes. Nothing is being held hostage. I'm still doing exactly what my role allows. That part was true. My role had been narrowed, so had theirs. Evan tried again, frustration leaking through polish. This is about trust. He said, if you trust me, you'll give me the keys. I almost smiled. Trust had never been the mechanism here. Structure was. The meeting moved on, but the damage lingered. I returned to my desk and opened a secured console I hadn't touched since the early days. Not to act, not yet. To prepare. I initiated a review protocol that quietly tagged every licensed component tied to my original architecture. No alerts, no disruptions, just markers. The system responded cleanly. Dependencies mapped, percentages calculated, reversion pathways verified. Everything behaved exactly as designed. By the end of the day, Douglas sent a short message asking for a follow-up. I didn't reply immediately. Power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when pressure forces the wrong question. They believed this was about permission. It wasn't. They were asking for authority they never legally held. And for the first time, I knew precisely how much leverage silence had already given me, and how carefully I would need to use it. That realization didn't make me reckless. It made me patient, focused, and aware that timing, not volume, would determine who controlled the outcome when the next request arrived under far less comfortable circumstances. I was invited to the board meeting without context, which told me everything. When a company suddenly wants clarity, it usually means someone else has finally asked the right question. I stood at the end of the table while faces I'd known for years studied me differently. Not hostile, not friendly, evaluating. The chair at the center remained empty. Douglas chose to stand instead. Explain the risk, the chairwoman said. Not the emotion, the math. So I did. I walked them through the architecture layer by layer. I showed how more than 60% of the company's operating value flowed through systems I designed, maintained, and licensed. I explained how those systems weren't modular in the way Douglas had been promising. They were interdependent by necessity. If those licenses are revoked, I said calmly, you're not looking at a patch. You're looking at a rebuild. Someone asked how long. I didn't hesitate. 7 to 9 years. Assuming you could hire the right people. Assuming they stay. Douglas cut in sharply. This is a threat, he said. She's trying to scare the board into submission. I turned toward him. It's not a threat. It's exposure. The room went quiet again. Silence has weight when numbers are involved. A director leaned forward. Are you saying the company can't function without you? I shook my head. I'm saying it can't function without the systems I built. There's a difference. Douglas laughed once. Too loud. This is exactly the behavior I warned you about. Defensive, uncooperative. His voice rose. We're talking about leadership, not leverage. Another board member interrupted him. We're talking about fiduciary duty. That word landed harder than anything I'd said. The meeting ended without resolution. Instead, the chairwoman looked at legal and said, initiate an emergency risk assessment. 48 hours. No one smiled on the way out. As I gathered my notes, I understood the shift. This was no longer a personality conflict. It was a countdown. Every glance, every pause, told me the board had stopped protecting egos and started protecting survival. The next 48 hours decide everything. I read the independent report alone before the board reconvened. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Numbers rarely are. The analysis confirmed what I already knew. Operational collapse wasn't hypothetical. It was measurable. Critical services depended on systems no one else fully understood. Replaceable, the report said. But only with time. Money. An institutional memory the company no longer had. Investors had protections written into their agreements. If risk thresholds were breached, capital could be pulled immediately. When the board gathered again, the tone had changed. Questions were shorter. Nobody joked. The report circulated silently, page by page, until Evan broke first. This is exaggerated, he said. voice tight. They're protecting her. This company doesn't revolve around one person. He looked around, searching for support. None came. I spoke only when asked. I clarified assumptions. I confirmed timelines. I let the math do the work. Cold logic has a way of stripping emotion out of arguments that rely on entitlement. Evan leaned forward, anger spilling through his polish. "You're sabotaging us," he said. "You want them scared?" His words overlapped themselves. "Faster now. This is personal." A board member across the table didn't look at him. She looked at Douglas. "This situation exists because of governance failure," she said evenly, "not emotion." Douglas tried to reclaim the room. "We are not going to dismantle leadership because of one technical opinion," he snapped. "This company was built on vision." Another director interrupted him. "It was built on execution." He tapped the report. "And this confirms execution risk." Then he said it, flat and final. "Bloodlines don't scale." The room went still. Evan stared at the table. Douglas opened his mouth, then closed it again. The chairwoman exhaled once and made a decision. "Douglas, we need to speak freely." She gestured toward the door. "Please, step out." He stood slowly, disbelief hardening into something quieter. As the door closed behind him, I understood the shift completely. Nepotism had finally been priced, quantified, and rejected. And for the first time, logic had outranked legacy. No one argued after that moment anymore. The room felt smaller once Douglas was gone, not quieter, just heavier. Like gravity had increased without warning. Everyone knew this was the point where pretending stopped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "These are my terms," I said, sliding a single page across the table. No theatrics, no negotiation posture, just facts. First, full technological control returned to me. Architecture, security, deployment authority, no committees, no proxies. Second, majority equity reflecting actual contribution, not legacy positioning. Control had to align with responsibility. Third, Evan would return to a role matching his demonstrated capability, not his last name. Training, supervision, earned advancement. The chairwoman read silently. Others followed. No one interrupted. Douglas stepped forward, hands open. "There has to be a softer solution," he said. Voice lower now. "We can restructure. Titles can be adjusted. Let's not burn everything down." He looked at me like reason might still work. "This isn't destruction," I said evenly. "It's correction." I let that sit. "You tried to erase function while keeping output. That math never works." Evan finally spoke, sharp and defensive. "This is blackmail." His face was red. "You're holding the company hostage." His words landed hollow. No one echoed them. I turned my laptop toward the table. Not the screen, just the keyboard. "You asked for authority," I said. "This is where authority lives." My hand rested lightly above the keys. Not pressing anything. Not yet. Douglas swallowed. "If we agree," he said, "can this stop?" He didn't mean the meeting. He meant the collapse he could finally see. I checked the time. "You have until the countdown ends," I said. I tapped once. A quiet tone confirmed activation. The license reversion timer appeared. No alarms, no flashing warnings, just a number moving forward, second by second. No one spoke after that. Control had changed hands completely, not through shouting or threats, but through preparation. They finally understood what silence had been doing all along, and why leverage never announces itself before it's irreversible. The decision didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with signatures. The board reconvened the next morning, calm in the way people are when fear has been quantified and contained. The chairwoman read the resolution aloud, each clause deliberate. My terms were accepted in full, no amendments, no compromises. The room didn't celebrate. It corrected itself. Douglas listened without interrupting. When his authority was formally removed, he nodded once, as if acknowledging a market shift rather than a personal loss. The title changed. The access changed. His role became advisory in name only. Power left him quietly, the way it always does when structure replaces ego. Evan tried to speak. The chairwoman stopped him. The decision regarding his position followed immediately. He was reassigned to an entry-level development track, supervised, evaluated, and publicly documented. No speeches, no cushioning language, just alignment with demonstrated ability. His face flushed, then emptied. Reality has a way of doing that. I didn't argue for it. I didn't need to. The board understood that correction only works when it's visible. Pretending otherwise would have been another failure of governance. By the time the meeting ended, the press release was already drafted, leadership realigned, operational continuity secured. Markets respond to clarity faster than sentiment ever could. The response came before noon. Trading volume spiked. Analysts reframed the narrative. Confidence returned. Not because of me, but because uncertainty had been removed. By the closing bell, the stock was up sharply. Recovering losses everyone had blamed on volatility. It wasn't volatility, it was misalignment. I watched the numbers without satisfaction or surprise. Justice doesn't feel loud when it's executed properly. It feels inevitable. As people filed out, no one congratulated me. They didn't need to. The company had chosen function over legacy, and the market had agreed. That was enough. I closed my laptop and stood, aware that this chapter wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring order where it had been deliberately disturbed, and proving that systems, when respected, always outperform entitlement in the long run. That outcome mattered more than applause, anger, or personal vindication alone. I didn't return to the company as a conqueror. I returned as an engineer finishing unfinished work. The first weeks were quiet, deliberate, procedural. Titles were reviewed against outcomes. Access followed responsibility. Promotions required evidence, not proximity. I rebuilt governance the way I built systems inputs. Constraints, verification. Hiring panels changed. Performance reviews became traceable. Decisions left back rooms and entered documentation. People noticed the shift before they trusted it. Stability always arrives before gratitude. Nepotism didn't end with a memo. It ended through structure. Reporting lines were flattened. Exceptions disappeared. When someone asked for a shortcut, the answer was simple: show the work. Evan stayed, supervised, learning fundamentals he had skipped. He wasn't punished. He was calibrated. Douglas exited without ceremony. No victory lap followed. Companies heal when noise stops. What mattered was continuity. Clients stayed. Engineers returned. The platform stabilized. Results followed the changes, not the speeches. I spent more time listening than directing. Builders want clarity, not saviors. When people understand how decisions are made, they stop guessing and start delivering. That was the culture we restored, months later. The metrics reflected it: lower churn, faster releases, fewer escalations. Predictable outcomes replaced heroic rescues. The company finally behaved like the system it claimed to be. On my desk sits a diagram of the core architecture, updated and annotated. It reminds me why this worked. Foundations aren't visible once buildings rise, but everything stands on them. They thought leadership was inherited. I reminded them it's engineered, by design, in real life. Value doesn't announce itself. It's built slowly, often invisibly, through decisions no one applauds and work no one wants to do. Titles can be reassigned overnight. Authority can be taken without warning. But what you build with your hands, your mind, and your integrity stays with you longer than any role ever will. I learned that silence, when chosen deliberately, can be more powerful than argument. That preparation matters more than reaction. And that justice, when it's grounded in structure and truth, doesn't need to be loud to be real. It simply restores balance. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or quietly pushed aside after giving your best, I hope this story reminded you of something important. Your worth doesn't disappear just because someone else fails to recognize it. Systems break when they ignore the people who hold them together. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments. I read them more than you might think. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you clarity, strength, or even just a sense that you're not alone, consider liking and sharing it so it reaches someone else who needs to hear it. If you want more stories like this, grounded, human, and honest, you're always welcome to subscribe and stay with us. Sometimes, that's how quiet strength spreads.